Hey guys, I'm Garrett, and today I'm going to show you how I made Thor's Gladiator swords from the new movie, Ragnarok. So these are the swords that are given to Thor in the Gladiator ring when he faces the Hulk. Now, granted, they were only in the movie for a few minutes, but they've been on advertisements and posters for the movie for months. Now, a lot of you guys know that I like to use digital fabrication in my work, but because there are two swords, I thought it'd be really cool to show you that you don't need a fancy CNC machine or anything like that to be able to make one of these. I'll go ahead and show you the process for both ways of making the sword, and we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's jump right in. As I started the project, I happened to find this rough cut of silver maple that had some spalting on it that looked like lightning, so I was really pumped to use it. I processed it down into 4 equal strips for the outside of the blades. For the inner core of the blade, I used some red oak for strength and durability. Sword number 1 started with the glue up, which was tough because the thin wood really wanted to warp, so I really had to clamp it down tight. It took a lot of clamps. I then put this on the CNC and did a flip mill, which is basically where I cut one side and then flip the piece over to cut the other side for a perfect match. When that was done, I cut off the extra with the bandsaw and it gave me something like this. Then using the CNC, I cut out the handle from some poplar, and I used cherry to cut out the crossguard and the pommel. After gluing them up, I needed to make sure that they fit well together, so I carved out a bit of the crossguard so that the grip would fit right in the notch. I also glued on the pommel of the sword and began to connect the lines using a handsaw. This allowed the grip to look like it was separate pieces connected together as one. And then I glued them together using the old-fashioned tape clamp method. Once that was good, it was time to work on sword number 2. As this was going to be done with traditional tools, I needed a blueprint to get it to match the other sword's dimensions. I printed out the design and then began cutting out the parts and taping them together to give me my template. Laying the template out on my wood, I marked all the points of the blade and then cut off and traced out the tang. Marking the angles on the blade allowed me to connect the dots with a straight edge so that I had a clean outline. At this point, I just cut out the outline on the bandsaw, leaving a little bit of the pencil line showing. This gave me a nice guide so I could clean it up to the final shape by sanding. To get the detail lines on either side of the blade, I took my paper template, laid it on top of the blade, marked the edge points, and then cut out small holes in the paper where every line intersection happened. This gave me just enough room to mark those points with the pencil. Then, using a straight edge, I connected the dots again. To create the grooves on the blade, I took the same bit I used on the CNC and put it in the hand router. This part wasn't nearly as difficult as much as time consuming, because I had to set up the fence and clamp everything down for every line, but it turned out great. After I cut the lines, I marked out where I wanted the blade to start tapering, and then, using a router table, took out a lot of material simply to save time. Using a cabinet scraper, I got the blade really close to my finished taper before doing a quick finishing pass on the edge sander to even it all out. For the crossguard on sword 2, I cut out the template I made and started working on getting the piece of cherry I had down to the right size. Once it was planed down, I traced the rest of the shape onto it so that I could cut it out on the bandsaw. Using the drill press and hand chisels, I cut out the hole in the center. Once I got the extra template lines on there, I used the belt sander and a whole lot of hand chiseling to get it to the right shape. When that was done, I grabbed some more poplar for the handle. I traced the dimensions of the tang onto these pieces and used a hand router to cut out the shapes. I cut just a smidge wider and deeper than my lines just to make sure I had ample room. Then I glued them together. I also capped up the hole with an extra piece of poplar that I used, and then I glued on a piece of cherry that would be used as the pommel. After it dried, I trimmed it down to a workable length for the lathe. When that was finished, I had to carve into the top of the handle a little bit to show the hole, and it was a bit loose, so I glued a few thin pieces of wood to the tang for a tighter fit. To get the same detail that's on Thor's swords, I marked the lines I needed down the grip. Then, using a chisel, I cut into the raised areas on the handle and chiseled away straight lines up the handle. It took some time, but after I had done a bunch of sanding, I got it just how I wanted it. At this point, I coated the blades with the polyurethane for protection, and also because I knew oil would yellow out the blades too much. And then I glued on the handles and used tape clamps again to make sure it dried right. Once it had dried enough, I cleaned off the extra glue and then did a whole bunch of finishing sanding to get it just right before putting tung oil on the handles. The tung oil was great because it really made the cherry pop and added a nice bronze color to the look of the grips. As I was giving the oil some time to dry, I decided to throw together a quick wall mount. This was mocked up on the computer and cut out on the CNC. I then painted white into the cut lines, and after it dried, sanded it down until the lines were crisp. Using the drill press, I made holes for the mounting hooks. And then I used a keyhole bit on the router to make sure that I got the hanging holes on the back. The center mounting pin was made from some scrap walnut and an oak dowel rod, and then glued into place. I really wanted the hammer detail to pop, so I brushed on a thin amount of stain to make sure that it would stand out. Once that was finished and dried, I coated it in polyurethane and attached to the mounting hardware. And finally, I hung it on the wall. If you liked this build, check out my other videos and make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss anything else I have coming. Also, be sure to follow me on Instagram at garrett.slazak so you can keep up with whatever other projects I have going on and see any behind the scenes stuff. Thank you guys. I'll see you in the next video.